Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. My name is Vanessa with ITS Communications, and today we are going to be talking about SciENcv with Drew Wright, who's one of our librarians at the Wood Library. Before we begin, I just wanted to let everyone know that I am recording today's session. So if you want to go back and review anything that we've discussed today, or even share it with some of your colleagues who may not have been able to attend, I will be sending you a follow-up email with a link to this recording, as well as any other resources we might discuss today. We are expecting quite a few people to be on today, so I have muted everyone just to prevent any background noise from disrupting the presentation. But please feel free at any point to post your questions in the chat or use the React button at the very bottom of your Zoom window to raise your hand if you'd like to come off the mic to ask your question. So without further ado, I am going to hand it off to Drew. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Cool. Thanks, Vanessa. Hey, everyone. My name is Drew. Probably met you in some form or another. But today we're going to be talking about the implementation of kind of like the official implementation of SciENcv into NIH's workflow to generate biosketches, or what used to be called biosketches, in addition to kind of like new supplemental forms that kind of filled the space of the olden age biosketch. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of the background for that very briefly, some of the other things that we can do while we get ready for this implementation. And we'll just do like a straight demo of the tool itself and how we can kind of do some of the pre-populating work to get those forms ready to go so that when the deadline rolls around at the end of May, which we'll talk more about in a second, we'll be ready to hit the ground running and can hopefully kind of make this transition as smooth and seamless as possible. So without further ado, we'll jump right in because do want to have some time at the end for questions and all of that fun stuff. So when we talk about kind of SciENcv and the what we're going to call the NIH Common Forms, which you've probably all heard about, and probably have a lot of questions about. Just for a little bit of background, if you're not super familiar, beginning at the end of May, for all sort of RPPRs, grant applications, and just-in-time things, the NIH is going to start using what they're calling Common Forms, which is essentially a standardized, sort of SciENcv/biosketch thing across all the funding agencies to convey sort of information that was previously reported on the old biosketch. This is approved and sort of announced last summer with the sort of May 25th date as the deadline. The current state of things, as far as I'm aware, that deadline is still being held up. So as we'll see in the SciENcv software, not quite all the changes have been made. So I did reach out to someone last week, and apparently that May 25th date is still happening. So we'll just plow right ahead as if everything is normal, and we'll hopefully get people prepared and ready to go by that date. So the kind of went over what the common forms are. So what the sort of new twist in this new announcement is, now all common forms are going to have to be completed using SciENcv. Now SciENcv may be kind of a new word for a lot of folks, but it's actually been around since like 2014, 2015 and implemented into MindCBI that whole time. So it's just kind of been sitting there, and you could have been using it if you have wanted to generate your biosketch, but it's a new piece of software to use. People have been using the Word documents forever, so there wasn't a ton of immediate sort of switching over to using SciENcv to generate biosketches. But more and more people have kind of been doing it throughout the years. So for those folks, this may not be super enlightening and maybe a little redundant if you're already using SciENcv, but you may have some questions that pop up as well. When this kind of topic came up, and we're like, okay, we're getting close to the deadline. Let's do a SciENcv talk. I was like, I did a SciENcv talk not too long ago, but I looked it up and it was 2017. So probably need a refresh. And shockingly, there hasn't been a ton of updates and changes to the actual platform since then. So if you've used SciENcv in the past, a lot of this will look very familiar to you. Just some of the questions maybe a little different than what you're used to seeing. Okay, so what is SciENcv? It's a platform very generally that's part of the MindCBI suite. So if you've used MindCBI to manage publications for grant funding or public access policy compliance, or anything like that, SciENcv is part of that suite of tools that's available to you in the MindCBI suite. And if none of this is ringing any sort of bells, this is all new. We'll do a very brief kind of overview of what kind of MindCBI looks like in general, because we're going to kind of start from MindCBI, make sure that's all squared away, and then we'll dive into SciENcv because it pulls a lot of its data from MindCBI. So you want that to be good to go. Any questions just about that before we sort of get rolling? That's a very broad overview that probably deserves about 30 to 45 minutes on their own. But essentially, we have SciENcv, now the home of our most of the NIH forms you're going to be needing to generate when you have grant applications come up. Cool. All right, so I mentioned May 25th is the deadline for switching over to these new forms. So what can we do now before we kind of know all of the details about what this is actually going to entail and having to generate these new forms ourselves? So we're going to do just kind of like a demo of all of these things, except for creating an ORCID ID or ORCID. It is, if you're not familiar with ORCID, it's basically your unique researcher identifier. And every publication that you specifically write, um, if applicable, you can attach your ORCID to that publication. And then that gets kind of shuffled around in the back end, the bibliographic data, the metadata that gets shuffled around to publishers, to databases, and to systems that use all of that data, including the ERA and NIH systems, the NSF systems, all of the government systems also use ORCIDs to disambiguate individual authors. So a lot of you probably already have ORCIDs because journals have started to become more proactive in asking for it when you're submitting uh, journal articles. Some have even gone so far as to start requiring it. And now the NIH is going to start requiring ORCIDs for PIs and co-PIs for all of their grants. So if you don't already have an ORCID and you do, appear as a PI or co-PI on grant funding, you're going to have to do this in a few months anyway. So I would go ahead and create an ORCID now. Just go to orcid.org. It's very straightforward and simple. And then I'll show you how to link that through to your MindCBI and SciENcv profile so that information is ready and available and linked to yourself across MindCBI, ERA Commons systems, and all the things that are kind of downstream from that are going to be more and more required to display that information as we sort of go forward and all the data gets linked together. We're going to talk about MindCBI profiles, like I kind of mentioned before, and we're going to make sure that you know how to link those profiles to your ERA Commons credentials. Again, people who have done the grant kind of funding process are already familiar with this. They probably already have your MindCBI account linked to your ERA Commons credentials, but I'll just kind of go through and show you how to make sure that that's actually the case and everything is talking to each other the way it's supposed to. We'll also talk about how to assign delegates to manage not just your SciENcv, but your My Bibliography account and MindCBI, so that if you're in charge of a large lab or a large group, you're probably generating tons of different biosketches for tons of different grants, which have tons of different publications that need to be reported. You don't have to manage that all yourself. You can assign delegates inside of the MindCBI system to handle a lot of that for you. So grad students, lab managers, department folks can handle all of that stuff on your behalf. The library can handle the publications. Speaking of that, we'll talk about how we make sure that all of our publications are in MindCBI. So like you claiming research products in the ERA system, those publications have to be in your MindCBI account. Similarly, when we're working inside of SciENcv, you can include references and citations to work that you've done as supporting material, but those publications have to be in my bibliography. So make sure that that is populated and good to go, and everything that you want to report is in there. And we'll show you how to do that and how to actually go about using SciENcv, finally, and most importantly, inside of their system to generate, what is still being called the biographical sketch or the biosketch. And we'll also take a look at what we think the common forms are going to look like, because the NSF has already sort of inserted their common forms and continuing support documentation into SciENcv. So it's not NIH branded, it's NSF branded, but it should be the same forms that we're expecting when this May 25th um, deadline passes. So any kind of questions about that before we get going into the actual demo? So we do have a question before we get started. Do department administrators that assist PIs with applications need our own ORCIDs? No, you do not. So the ORCIDs are the links to the authors and the researchers specifically. So the ORCID ID can be linked by anyone inside of the SciENcv MindCBI environment, as long as they have access to that account, which the delegation process does. So you don't need your own ORCID ID the same way that you don't need your own ERA Commons credentials if you're someone's delegate in MindCBI. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And hopefully that'll be kind of made clear when we get into the actual guts. Does that answer your question, Melissa? Cool. I'll assume yes. Great. Awesome. So now I'm going to jump out of the slide deck, and we're just going to kind of go through the process in MindCBI, kind of showing you where we can do the delegation, where we can attach your ERA Commons credentials if not already there, and where the SciENcv stuff actually lives, so that you can at least go in, poke around, kind of get a feel for the environment, so that when we kind of get the full green light, it'll be a relatively easy and straightforward conversion from Biosketch to comment forms. Cool. So you can get to MindCBI either directly, like honestly, if you just Google MindCBI, you'll get there. Or if you're inside of PubMed, it's the same credentials that you get in your PubMed credentials. So if you've never actually logged in to MindCBI or from PubMed, it's always going to be in the top right. I'm going to log out just so you can kind of see what that looks like. So if to go in from PubMed, since we're all probably pretty familiar, it's the same login credentials up here. So if you have ERA credentials, the preferred method of logging into MindCBI is always going to be using your ERA Commons credentials. That way, that connection and the linkage of those two accounts is automatic and persistent. But you don't have to. You can log in with any of these options. You can also log in with your Weill Cornell credentials. But if you have your ERA Commons credentials, always use those to log in. And this is the general dashboard. You'll see a bunch of stuff here that we're not super concerned with. What we're going to pay attention to eventually is the My Bibliography and the SciENcv section. But before we get into that, while we're on this sort of main page, the first thing I'm going to want to show you is how to assign delegates to your profile. So that's in your account and then account settings. And then you can add delegates using this add delegate button. So you'll just need to know the email of the folks that you want to provide access to. They have very nice instructions here. So maybe I can add my personal. Yeah, so basically I'll get an email about this and it'll say, hey, I am, so-and-so is requesting you access to this account. That person then accepts it, and then you can provide access to bibliography or SciENcv or both. So for most places and for most cases, I would assume let's do access to both, because this will let you assign someone to add publications to your bibliography that may or may not be there, and add people to manage your SciENcv. So it kind of covers kind of both things. Any questions about adding a delegates? Right, so somebody asked about getting ERA Commons credentials. That has to be done through a request through Osra, um, I believe. And if anyone here on this call knows otherwise, please, yeah, please take the lead on that. So thank you for picking that. But I believe a request has to be made um, through Osra and potentially through your department as well. So if anyone wants to pop that in the chat, I would be grateful. All right. So we're going to move on. So that is setting up a delegate in MindCBI. So the next thing we're going to want to do is make sure that everything and all publications that you're interested in potentially reporting is in. Awesome. Chat is successful. Make sure everything is in your bibliography that you want to report. And so, as I mentioned before, if you are sort of in the ERA Commons ecosystem a lot and you're working with grant applications and RPPRs, this is going to be old hat for you, because all publications that you report on any NIH system have to be in your bibliography. But for those who this is new information, the bibliography, my bibliography and MindCBI, is essentially where you include publications that you have either written or contributed to. And that distinction will kind of come in play a little bit later. But it's also where, you can check to make sure that your ERA Commons account is linked. If you do not see this icon in my bibliography, then you can go back into your account settings, link your ERA Commons credentials, and then you'll be seeing this. And you also won't necessarily see all this kind of like compliance information. So your view may look a little bit different than mine. But when you're working in SciENcv and in an ERA Commons space, you always want to see this icon here if you have an ERA Commons account and credentials and all of that fun stuff. So I would say 20 to 30% of like troubleshooting questions and people having issues with these systems talking to each other is that they don't have their ERA Commons account linked. So that's always first thing to check if something is weird or funky or isn't quite working the way you want it to be. All right, so what we want to do here is just make sure that all of our publications are ready and available and able to be linked to our SciENcv document and form when we start getting to that. And the way to do this is there's a couple different ways. Sometimes it happens automatically. So if everything is linked together, kind of on the back end and everything is relatively seamless, sometimes you will not have to add publications to this. It'll automatically get put from ERA Commons into my bibliography. I never assume that that's going to be the case. So I always tend to do this kind of manually. And there's a couple different ways to do it. If it's in PubMed, you can add a citation from PubMed where it essentially just asks you for the PMID. That's the easiest way to do it. Or if it's something that's not in PubMed, you have to do it manually. So PubMed is not, all knowing. There are lots of publications that aren't necessarily indexed in PubMed. And as we'll talk about when we get to the Biosketch, you can include articles in press, you can include posters, white papers, pretty much any kind of output that you want, which those aren't necessarily going to be indexed in PubMed, but you need them to be in your bibliography to link it to your SciENcv. So you have to manually add it in PubMed. And this is just filling out like a metadata form. Fairly straightforward, but very annoying if you have a lot of these types of things that you want to include. The other thing I'll mention is the visibility of this. So SciENcv allows you to ask or to include a link to your bibliography it's highly recommended that you do. And in order for that to happen, this has to be made public. It's public by default. You can change it to private if you want. I recommend leaving it public. So if there are pub papers that we're missing, again, adding them from PubMed, adding them manually, or you can actually do them through PubMed, uh, like a PubMed search. Uh, Say we needed to add these 3 papers, like maybe you did an author search for yourself. Um, you can go to send to my bibliography. And then if you're managing other people's bibliographies for them, you can add them to those bibliographies as well without necessarily having access to those accounts. But those are accounts that we're delegates for. Any questions about adding things to my bibliography? All right, somebody asked when it says upload citations from a file. I know for a fact it takes an RAS. I'm not sure what else it does. I will look at that and let me write down that note and get back to you. RAS for sure. Excel spreadsheets, as if there's PMIDs in the Excel spreadsheet for sure. Anything other than that, I would not assume it's going to work super well. So we had a question for preprints and poster publications. If you plan on reporting those in SciENcv or ERA Commons, grant applications, RPPRs, etc., then you need to put them in my bibliography. So you would do that manually. So for preprints, you want to make sure that it's not in PubMed, because PubMed actually indexes a decent amount of preprints from bioRxiv and medRxiv. So if that preprint is there, you just add it from PubMed. If it's not, you add it manually. Poster presentations the same way. And then you just pick, from this drop down, which one of those it is. Book chapters are another thing, not heavily indexed, but are fairly important for reporting purposes if you wanted to include them. So you want to make sure that you add them here into MindCBI. Any questions? Any more questions about populating your bibliography? Awesome. So now we're going to get into sort of the meat of this, and that is SciENcv. So we're comfortable our MindCBI account is linked to ERA. Our publications are in our bibliography so that we can pull them in if we need to. So now let's go to SciENcv. And again, you can just Google SciENcv and you'll get here, or you can log into MindCBI and see it in your dashboard. You should be seeing my screen. Is anyone having issues with
your profile that's on the screen.
Okay, it says SciENcv though. I can
Yes.
check my little window here.
If you're
Okay,
just gonna see it.
cool. Got it. So let me just answer another question. When I add a delegate, I cannot select 2 databases for them. So from what I recall, and I can actually do this live so you can make sure, you do it after they've accepted the request. So let me do my personal one. Oh, it's going to ask me to log in, which I don't have. But Nancy, I'll get back to you just to make sure. I'll do a demo on my own and just make sure it is. But I think so. You send a, if I remember the workflow, you send a invitation, they accept it, and then you assign their privileges once they've accepted that assignment, if that makes sense. All right, so we will hop into SciENcv. So fairly straightforward, fairly blank to start with. Very first thing you want to do is make sure that your profile is as filled out as possible. So just include all the information that they ask for, regardless of whether or not it's required. If you have an ORCID ID or an ORCID, make sure that you link it here. So I already have one, so it's not going to ask me to fill that out. But if I didn't and I clicked on that link, oops, did I just delete that? Yes, I did. Oh, let me get my window back. Sorry, I closed the window accidentally. There we go. So if I didn't have this and I've just clicked this link, it would look like it is for the NSF ID, which I don't have one. And then it would ask me to log into my ORCID account and then link it that way. So that is basically how you link your ORCID ID to your SciENcv profile in your MindCBI account as well. Next up, if you have any old documents, so I mean, we've actually had a lot of people who maybe made one a while ago, like a decade ago. Obviously, that's not the current format. So eventually, they are supposed to implement a way to import all of the information over from old biosketches into the new format. That is currently not functional. And again, I'm not going to assume that it's going to be made functional in the next 2 months. So we'll just kind of go through this process of generating one from scratch, just so you can kind of see what that looks like. So we'll go new document. I'm going to call mine Tech Tuesday test. And then we get some options here. So there is a slight difference between the biosketch and the fellowship biosketch. One of the sections is a little different. We're going to focus on the biosketch for the NIH biosketch. And eventually I'm going to also show you what the NSF biosketch and the NSF current support form looks like, because we think it's going to be the same as what the NIH ultimately starts asking for. And you'll see it's kind of the same information, but slightly different. The NIH biosketch still will live in some form. So the questions that the biosketch asks, like contributions to science, and just like awards and credentials and things like that, that are kind of like NIH specific, those things will still live in something. We don't know if it's going to be called like the biosketch or if it'll be another supplementary document. But we'll just show you what this looks like for now, because again, it's going to be the same information. It just may be branded slightly differently. So I'm going to start with a blank doc. These things are supposed to eventually work. They do not currently. So you can use an old biosketch or like an old XML version of an old biosketch if you wanted to, but not the greatest at the moment. All right. So what we get is just a fairly straightforward form. It's going to fill in all the information about you that it knows. So it knows what my ERA Commons ID is because it's linked to my MindCBI account. It knows what my ORCID ID is because I linked it to my overall SciENcv account. So we don't have to worry about that. And then the rest is just the same information that exists on your current biosketch. Education and training. It's very annoying, but you do have to go through and add it one by one for now. It's possible that at some point we'll be able to link it to institutional systems so that this can pull in the same education material that our administrative systems in the college have. I would not assume that's going to be done anytime soon. So I would just assume this is going to have to happen manually for now. And this is where having a delegate comes into play if you don't want to like manually key all of this information in. So we'll talk a little bit about Roxanne's question about delegates in just a minute. I'll table that for now, and then I will circle back around to that. And let's see, we have education training. You just continue on as you go. Personal statements. Again, this is no different than the personal statement of your current biosketch. So a copy paste job will do it. But if not, here is sort of, where you put your background and um, your sort of qualifications for this specific grant. Here's where you're going to put any sort of thing that isn't necessarily represented in the grant application. Or sometimes people put kind of like a generic bio here. It really is up to you and how you decide how you want to do it. The NIH does provide a little bit of guidance on their side of things about the content that they're looking for. But from sort of a technical standpoint, it's basically just a text box. You're popping stuff in there, and then it allows you to select citations from your bibliography, um, so that you can support the statement that you just made. So you can pick 4 publications. They say peer review. It doesn't necessarily have to be. What a lot of people tend to do is select their you know most relevant papers to this particular topic. Some people like to do their most highly cited papers. Some people like to do their papers that appear in the most kind of like prestigious journals. But we'll just kind of say we wanted to pick these 4, and then it just kind of formats them and pops them in the document so that you can have a look at it. Positions of scientific appointments and honors, relatively self-explanatory. Again, it's just like a 1-by-1 annoyance to have to enter those in. But again, mostly copy paste. Contribution to science is similar to your personal statement, but a little more broken down to kind of specific areas that you've worked in. So again, there is a little bit of wiggle room as to how you actually want to do this. You can pick the most relevant sections in your field related to this particular project, or you can do the stuff that you work the most in. So this is like really important if you're kind of working a multidisciplinary field, or you've had your fingers in a lot of different sort of pies throughout your career, and you can sort of group those together. So you're not just have this one giant bibliography, but you just kind of say like, in these years I worked on this particular topic. So in the previous years of my graduate work was on this. Now I'm currently working on this, and here are the papers that support those particular things. So it's another text box, and then you can select more citations, again up to 4. There is redundancy here. You can select things more than once. It's not a problem. And then here is where it's kind of more common for folks to choose things like white papers, in process, preprints, posters, abstracts, things like that. Because if you're writing about what you're currently working on, you may have 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things that are super relevant to your current area, but that haven't made it through, kind of the whole publication process or just presented at conferences and all that stuff. So you don't have to worry about doing that. And then here at the link at the bottom is where you can include a link to your published work in my bibliography. So I would always recommend saying yes, because that just gives folks kind of like an approved link to your bibliography, because they want to see a link, but linking to like our Vivo instance page, for instance, with your bibliography there, or like a bibliography that's on your um, uh, lab page or lab department page or something like that, that is not encouraged. They do not like kind of random URLs in these documents. So this from like an official valid source is much preferred. Um, so we'll say once we get everything entered, um, currently the way it's set up, we can download this as a formatted PDF, and you can take a look at what it actually looks like. Um, nice and formatted. Again, this specific format and this specific document is going to go away. But for now, it sort of puts something in a nicely recognizable form that you're familiar with, and you can make sure everything is good to go and acceptable. So I'm going to check the chat. I know this has been popping off, so let's take a look. Um, so ongoing projects, you can do that either in your personal statement or in the ongoing support documentation. That is kind of some of the new-ish forms, and I'll show you what the NSF form of that looks like. But yeah, I would put that in the personal statement as well. Redundancy is not an issue here, so if it's relevant and it's important, kind of put it in as many places as possible. Is there any way to enter a PMC or a PME to pull up a citation? So you think that that would be good, but there is not. But you can just do a control F. Um, so if we'll say we want to, let's find one down here. We say we want to add, this publication. We control F it and select it there. You can add citations. Another way to add citations is through here as well. So if it's not there and you want to add it, you can just paste the PMID as well. But the control F and then select it is the way to do it inside of this particular interface. Personal statements are relevant. Yep. Um, yep. So you would have multiple SciENcvs in the same way that you would have um, multiple uh, versions of the Word document. So say I wanted to make a new document, and this is where using an existing document comes into play. So we'll say Tech Tuesday Test 2, Biosketch, and we're going to use this as an existing template. So now we have a new document that is a duplicate, and then we just kind of edit it as we go. So you can tweak the personal statement if you want, because it's kind of like a job application. You want to tweak the CV and the cover letter a little bit for each thing you're applying to. So yeah, you would have a different SciENcv for each um, project that you're working on. Let me see, going through personal statement. Yep. Yeah, the WRG side of things, I'm not super sure how that's going to be. Let me I'm going to take that down, Abraham, and I will ask and get back to you about that. Because I know I'm actually working with a lot of the Osra folks on this, but how it's going to be implemented in WRG, I'm not super sure. I will find out and let you know. Let me grab this as a note. Thank you, Monia, for replying to that. It just the margins? No. So I think part of the reason why they're moving to these common forms is to try to stop people from doing that in a way. But um, I would not be surprised if, actually, I know for a fact that, and we'll talk about that when we get to the NSF ones, you actually have to certify it like when you actually download it. So there's another level of kind of like security that's plopped into these things. But yeah, so eventually also we're probably not even going to be exporting PDFs out. At some point in the future, they're just going to be pulling this directly in from SciENcv into ERA Commons. So it's most likely not even going to be a actual sort of documentation. So the HTTP stuff for links, we've actually followed up on this in the past. So supposedly for, sorry, my dog, for my CBI links and official, like my bibliography links, that is an okay allowable URL. If you hear otherwise, let us know, because we've gotten confirmation that that is one of the few hyperlinks that are okay to include. So just as a heads up about that, you should be okay with this and pretty much only this, as far as having hyperlinks in your documents. But yeah, please let us know if you come across that and that is not the case. Since any specific guidance hasn't been published yet, are they keeping this item? So the ongoing documents, I for now would put in the personal statement, and I believe that it would go in this secondary documentation, which I'll show you. Thanks, Ozra. So I'll show you what the um, NSF is currently asking for, so you can kind of see what these forms will end up looking like. So you'll notice that when we added a new document, one of the options um, was NSF biographical sketch and NSF current and pending other support. So I'll just show you what these look like. Hmm. Because I believe, fairly certain, this is what the common forms are going to end up looking like. So very similar information here, your ORCID ID to include if you haven't. Um, any sort of other stuff that you would go in the other format, it's going to go here as well. These forms will be kind of like synergize, if that makes any sense. Appointments and positions, relatively same. Products are essentially the same as publications. But you'll notice this one's only asking for five as opposed to the like 20, like the 24 you can include in the NIH Biosketch, especially with the contributions to science. So the contributions to science is going to live on in its own document. We just don't know exactly what that's gonna look like yet. And then you can include other things as well. The certification is what I mentioned before you can download it, and this has to be done from the PI's account in the NSF system. The PI or co-PI has to certify the download, um, which is just an extra annoying step that you have to do. And then there's more sort of just like admin steps that you have to take into account. Um, but this is probably what the common forms are going to end up looking like for the biosketch. And then for the ongoing and um, uh, current support, we'll look at the NSF one again, just so you can kind of see what, ooh, action cannot be completed. Great. Let me reload. Maybe I had a duplicate there. There we go. So this is going to be where you would include that information. Um, just filling out as much information as you possibly can, ID numbers, um, stuff like that. And so that's where that information is going to go if you don't want to put it in your personal statement. I would put it in both places, unless that's an annoyance for y'all, just to have it in there as many places as possible. Because you never know who, especially once this gets a little more streamlined, like who's going to be reviewing kind of each separate document. So any overlap, do it. Anything that makes sense, put it there. As much information as possible in as many places as possible. Okay, it's going through the chat again. Yeah, you're gonna have to get to SciENcv from MyMCBI. That's as for now, that's going to be, for the near future, that's going to be the way it goes. I actually listened to my presentation from 2017, and in there I was like, in a couple years, SciENcv is going to be required. And I thought it would be 2 or 3 years, and it ended up being 8. So I don't know how long until the downloading of the PDFs is not going to be done anymore, and it's just going to be pulled directly into ERA Commons or any other admin systems downstream. It will happen. I just don't know when. It could be another 8 years or 10 years or who knows. So yeah, I'm just kind of skipping around here, but should we have an NIH biosketch and an NSF biosketch? Unfortunately, yes. You do have to have both, which is redundant for now. The idea of the common forms is that that is supposed to eliminate that. I haven't seen anything in documentation that suggests that that's going to be done May 25th. Um, so for right now, yes. Ideally and ultimately, no, for having multiple biosketches. Similarly, if you're NSF funded, they have their own version of the public access policy, and you have to at this point you have to have publications in NSF's version of PubMed Central and NIH's version of PubMed Central. They're siloed and they're not connected at the moment. So if you are funded by multiple agencies, the idea is to eventually eliminate the redundancy, but for now, you do. You have to take care of everything in both places, which is annoying. So can you show the downloaded PDF of the BioSketch to show what it looks like with faculty validation? Um, yeah, I'll do that with the NSF one. Are we good? Yep. Hopefully this is done relatively quickly. Draft is good. Let me just play that. Ah, that's probably because I haven't filled out all the application. It's not, yeah, I'll have to do that. But what's a good way around this? Because I haven't finished it yet. Hmm. So the NIH one doesn't require validation yet. So I can show you what it looks like, but it doesn't have that certification step involved with it. It's just the same document that we've always generated. So unfortunately, I don't have an up-to-date NSF one to download to show you. Um, what I can do is when Vanessa sends out the link in the follow up, I'll fill one of these out and I'll have that kind of like workflow like highlighted so you can see what it looks like. And I'll also link out to I think Cornell up in Ithaca, they're do way more NSF stuff than we do. They'll have documentation that shows that already. So we'll have that up in the follow up. Let me see. Can delegates also manage bibliographies of the researcher? Yes. So if you go back to um, publications, you can select which bibliography you want to manage here. In addition, when you're in PubMed and you're adding publications, oops, you can select which profile you want to add the publications into. So we go send to bibliography, and then these are the people who we, manage as a delegate. So similarly, right now you can't select a new bibliography or a new SciENcv from this screen, but you would go back into MindCBI and click on, the name of the people. Whoops. Let's say, you click into their SciENcv profile and then you add a document that way. So you don't do it from your SciENcv screen, you do it from the dashboard, if that makes sense. Just to make sure I'm catching all of these. Vanessa, if you notice something that I haven't answered, let me know.
Yeah, no problem. I
Uh,
think you've managed to answer most of them. And I will send you, of course, the chat log just in case you want to review
okay,
it to anybody.
awesome. So yeah, the last one just came in. Does NSF use a supplement form as well? They do. Um, that is the. Let me get out of here. That is what um, these two forms are kind of the two NSF forms. What the NSF doesn't collect is the um, the contributions to science. And they don't have places where you can put, things like credentials, for clinical folks, if you have, certifications and things like that. So that's why the old BioSketch is going to live on in some form, but it's probably just going to be like section C and probably section B because everything else is kind of the same. So ultimately, there's going to be a common form biosketch, which is going to probably look like this. And then there's going to be like an NIH supplement, which is going to be primarily the kind of like the unique information that the NIH asks for. And then there's also going to be the current and pending other support. So it'll probably be like three, documents in total that the NIH side is going to have to work on. But they're all going to be sort of in SciENcv, and they'll be connected in some way. Their ORCID and your ERA Commons IDs will sort of tie them together. So it shouldn't be that big of a lift. But it's kind of just introducing more documents. So let me just go through. NIH also required, yes, May 25th. Once delegated, you'll see the documents to revise. You'll see them in your dashboard. There'll be a SciENcv section, and then there'll be a place for accounts whose people's SciENcvs you have been selected to delegate. So they'll be, once you click into here, you will see them. So you see, I don't see them in like my sort of field here, but once I click into their accounts, I will be able to see their documents. Um, Whereas the bibliographies are a little different. You can actually see everyone's bibliographies that you're accounted for here in your dashboard. So it's another level that you have to kind of drill down to get to their documentation. Yep. So NSF bio. So again, the NSF bio is seemingly what is sort of going to be the basis of the quote unquote common forms. So that's why I wanted to show it to you, even though it hasn't been kind of rebranded the NIH forms yet. It's going to be based on that, if not exactly the same thing. Because again, the idea is just to pick one form and use that as the basis of everything. But the NIH asks for more information, so they're going to have a supplemental form that's essentially the old biosketch. I know that it's extremely confusing and annoying, but that is kind of the the path that they're taking. Any additional questions on anything? I will say that, and I'll put this in the chat, we do have a guide up for this. And as we get kind of more and more information and like details and confirmation and finalized documents and things like that, we'll plop that here, update it as much as possible. I will also point out Yale's guide is way better than any other guide on this that I've seen, including the NIH. So we have a link to that as part of this as well, because it is fantastic. So I'm not going to try to reinvent the wheel. They have a great guide set up that you can take a look at. And like I said, it's better than the ones that the NIH themselves have made. So um, keep an eye out on that as well. And we'll update this as we find out more info as we go forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Drew. I'll be sure to share those links in the follow-up email with everybody as well, so you don't have to feel like you have to scramble to get the links that Drew just posted in the chat as well as Mariella. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. A lot of great questions. For those who joined us a little late, I will be sending out a link to this recording. Give me about 24 hours and I'll have everything to you. Drew, whenever you have a chance, just send me that link you were referring to, and
Yep.
I'll share it with everybody who registered. But thank you so much, Drew, for teaching us more about SciENcv and to everyone who took the time to learn more about this. If you have any questions after the session, once you get that follow-up email from me, please feel free to just write back and, I'll make sure that Drew gets it so he can help answer any questions you might have. But have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks. Oh, and Melissa, if you're still on. Yeah, so the point of contact WCM for my CBI. I'm sort of that person, definitely on the publication side of things, because I do a lot of work with the publication access policy. And the Science CV kind of like slice of things is like right next to that. It's adjacent to that stuff. So if you have any MindCBI specific questions, I can definitely help you out on that end. Again, the sort of unknown at the moment with the common forms is that it just hasn't been like completely implemented across all of the agencies yet. But general MindCBI stuff, we can definitely help you out with that.
Awesome. Thanks, Drew. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.